Hi, and welcome to another edition of Heart of a Pronghorn, where we catch up with Pronghorn alumni and see what they're doing after their time at Pronghorn Athletics. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Freddy Tremblay, former women's rugby player. Freddy played for the Pronghorns from 2012 until 2017. She was a Canada West All-Star in 2015 and was part of a CIS championship tournament team that year as well. Freddie graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Science in Kinesiology and Psychology, and then she went on to do her master's in counseling at Gonzaga. Thanks for joining us today, Freddie. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Let's start with, how did you end up in Lethbridge and with Pronghorn Athletics?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story, actually. So when I was in grade 11, I had an older brother who had gone to university, and my parents were starting to plant that seed into my mind to say, let's think about where you're going to go after high school. So I think I'm from Calgary, and we took a ski trip to Fernie, I think, during spring break. And my parents were like, let's go down to Lethbridge just to see the university. And me, like a moody teenager at the time, I was like, this is stupid. Why would anyone want to live in Lethbridge? And I reluctantly agreed to go. So we're on campus in Lethbridge, just outside of the athletic office, and Sandy Slavin, the athletic director at the time, comes out of the office, and I'm looking at all the team pictures, and she's like, oh, are you an athlete? Do you play a sport? And I was like, yeah, I play rugby in Calgary. So she says, oh, the rugby team is having an ID camp next weekend. Why don't you reach out to Toby Boulay? He's the team manager. Maybe see if, you could come join the camp. I was like, okay, sure. So I emailed Toby, and he said, yeah, come on down. We'd love to have you. He knows nothing about me. I know not much about the program. I did have Pronghorn alumni as my coaches up in Calgary. So I had known a little bit about the program, but it wasn't really somewhere that I had my eye on. So yeah, I come down the following weekend, do the ID camp, love it. Toby and Neil were like, yeah, come back next year in your grade 12 year. So I did that. And then in my grade 12 year, come down to the ID camp. And then they had offered me a redshirt spot on the team at the ID camp. And then I don't remember kind of the timeline, but I had gotten an early acceptance to U of L. So I kind of had already my eyes set on U of L, and had come around to the idea of coming down to little old Lethbridge.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. Do you remember the alumni that were coaching you in Calgary?
Yeah, so Reggie McKenzie, Ali Laurent, and who was the other one? There's one more. Oh man, I can't remember now.
Yeah, and that's one of the impacts that we've seen over the time, especially in women's rugby, is the players are out in the community after they're done and giving back to the sport, and you did that as well once you graduated and were coaching almost immediately after playing. And it's one of the great things about our small university is the impact that the athletes can have on the next generation. So with your time in University of Lethbridge, you did have some success individually and as a team. What are some of your favorite memories?
Oh man, I hate this question because there's just too many. I think a lot of the fun memories though come down to almost like off the field moments, right? So it's like the bus rides, traveling, like taking the ferry when we go to the coast, potlucks that we had as a team. Closer to the end of my rugby career at U of L, we did like morning practices on the field, and those sunrises were just so wonderful. Obviously, like the sisterhood and the friendships that I made throughout my 5 years was huge. Yeah, I don't know, like one game that does stand out in my mind is when we were at Can West in Edmonton, and we were kind of the underdogs, and it was Rick's first year coaching us, and we beat UFC, and that was such a cool, epic moment. I think it was the last 5-10 minutes that kind of determined us as the winners with 2 big interceptions, and then scoring 2 tries kind of back to back. So that was really memorable for me, kind of like an on the field moment. And of course, Rick coaching us had a huge impact on me as a player and an individual. So yeah, just so many good memories.
Yeah, and it's funny because prior to that game, I remember Rick talking in his office, and he told me, we're gonna shock Calgary with this, and they're not gonna see it coming. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's been, they've been a kind of a powerhouse for a couple years, and I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And sure enough, right to the T, exactly what he said,
Yeah.
it happened. And I remember going out with you guys to Queens for that trip to nationals, and you guys had a pretty special group of girls, and it was fun to watch, just that growth under Rick, and how he had the utmost faith in the team and what you guys were going to do. So it does have, it's hard to believe that it's been going on 6 years now that trip happened. So
Yeah.
and let's get into kind of your education end of things, and you know how that helped to set you up where you are now, and the University of Lethbridge and its unique kind of learning uh, experience that you can have as a student athlete. Just talk about your experience in the classroom at University of Lethbridge.
Yeah, yeah, I think U of L was such a good fit for me. In my time, as I said, kind of starting to think about universities in high school, I had gone out to Toronto to visit the U of T there, and I'm not a big city girl, is what I realized out there. So the size of Lethbridge just was such a good fit for me, and yeah, the classroom sizes are nice and small. I think just like the community aspect of Lethbridge is such a thing that strikes me when I reflect back on like my experience as a pronghorn. Just like you were saying, coaching. I think I started coaching after my second year playing, just in the summers that I was staying here. Um, in the off season in the summer, and it just builds so many connections in your network, just both like personally but also professionally. I found that those connections here in Lethbridge have served me well, and yeah, like in terms of class sizes and the education part, kinesiology was the program that I had chose to go into, and absolutely loved it. I think it was my first year that I decided to add on the psychology piece after taking a psych course. So that's really kind of what I've taken into my professional career, kind of that path, but also kind of falling back a little bit on my kines background as well, in what I'm starting to do right now.
Okay, so now it's a perfect segue. Let's get into, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so right out of university, I worked for Horizon School Division for 3 years. And so part of that really big excitement in working in a school division, especially in the high school, was that I could coach. So I coached W.R. Myers for, I think it was 2 seasons with two great coaches, Shayla Anderson and Chris Comrie. And it was a pleasure to coach with them. We got to have a really fun trip out to Victoria with the team in my last year of coaching. And then after I started my master's in my last year of working at Horizon through Gonzaga, and such a different experience from being a student athlete with the Gonzaga experience for, I guess, 2 reasons. So reason number one was it was like a cohort in Calgary. So I wasn't actually down in Spokane for my whole 2 years. So it was like weekend classes up in Calgary with a cohort there. And then our professors would fly up from Spokane to come teach us. And then we did have a summer residency in Spokane for a month, and it was in the summer. So it was different because, they didn't have sports going on out there during that time. I think they had a couple of like off-season sports training, but nothing like no games to go watch or anything like that. So campus felt a lot different than what it felt like here at the U of L, where there's kind of athletes floating in the hallways and you say hi to people and you know what team they're on, kind of thing. So very different experience from being a student athlete at the U of L than being a master's student at Gonzaga without sports. So yeah, and what I'm doing right now is I'm a behavior consultant and a counselor at Key Connections Consulting here in Lethbridge. So I stayed in Lethbridge I like it here. I actually moved to Colehurst, which is even smaller than Lethbridge, and we love it here. I got married in the summer, so my husband, I met him through rugby. He still plays for the Lethbridge Rugby Club. So we met there, and he's still playing or hoping to play, I guess. With COVID, it's a little different. And I'm just kind of the cheerleader on the side now. And yeah, in the last 5 years, it's been a journey, to say the least, in kind of figuring out who I am as an individual outside of the athlete identity. And it's, like a lot of reflection that I've been having on my part, but also lots of conversations that I've been having with former teammates about the grief of that identity. So yeah, lots of therapy for myself, and figuring out, my self-worth and who I am as a person. And I so recently started, even just last week, an Instagram account called The Athlete Afterthoughts. And it's just a series of my thoughts after I'm done rugby and after I'm done competing competitively, and just kind of grieving that identity of who I was. And it just comes even down to how I introduce myself. I think a lot of the times in classes at the U of L, the professor would say, introduce yourself to the person beside you and say one interesting fact. And hands down, and I'm sure a lot of athletes say this, it's, hi, I'm Freddy and I play rugby, or I'm on the rugby team. And so when I left sports, it was, hi, I'm Freddy, and was like an awkward, like, what do I say next? So it was like, and I used to play rugby. So kind of like shifting away from that identity has been pretty interesting. And it's such a huge part of, what you go through as a student athlete. And then it's like the what's next, or like, now what kind of thing. So it's just like a really common feeling that a lot of athletes feel and go through. And it's a conversation I think that we need to continue having, just to kind of normalize it and kind of validate that that's an experience that is hard to go through.
Yeah, and obviously with COVID, I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. For people that are looking at the Instagram, is athlete afterthought. Given what we've experienced over the last year, and the high school seniors and the university seniors, and they've kind of had to make a shift in how they view themselves with losing their given sport for a year. So kind of talk a little bit about how you came up with this, and where you'd like maybe it to go.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've had that question a couple of times, where I'd like for it to go. I have no idea. I think right now it's just kind of like a therapeutic journey for me, and for others to, if I can, like, bring validation to one other athlete, that's my goal right now. So I don't really have a vision for where it's going to go, other than just kind of, normalizing it for other athletes, and just validating that it's an experience that is so common and not talked about enough. So kind of almost like reframing. A lot of it is looking at reframing our athletic thoughts, right? So as athletes, we always strive to be the best, and we always want to be number one. And like the no pain, no gain kind of mentality is one that's often talked about. So almost kind of like reframing, like, how is that beneficial for us after sports, right? So do we want to be, the best counselor ever? Do we want to, and at the same time, how do we allow for grace and patience and forgiveness in that? Because a lot of those mindsets sometimes don't serve us well in our life after athletics too. And I guess even too in athletics, how do we allow for forgiveness and grace, and trusting the process, and honoring kind of our mental health and our feelings and all those kind of things. And I think with COVID, it's tough, because a lot of those senior players aren't playing their final season, or aren't playing what they thought would be their final season. So it's almost like, for me, in my kind of experience, I knew that I was going to age out of this program, and I kind of prepared myself for that grief, not knowing that I was actually doing that. And then for, like, injuries, or for people that get cut, or for people that are affected by COVID and aren't playing their last season, their grief kind of came on suddenly, right? It wasn't like something that was expected. It was put onto them, and it was totally out of their control. So I feel like those kind of instances, they don't even have time to prepare themselves to grieve that identity or that loss of their sport in their everyday. And I think for me, like one thing I reflect on is, so I finished my university program in December 2016, 2017. Either way, December. And so I went right into my professional career in December, at the end of December. And so was starting to work full time at Horizon School Division. And then I was also working part-time at the hospital as a physiotherapist assistant. And so I kind of dove right into that professional career. And there was a sevens tournament that Rick had invited me to. He said, like, this is a sevens tournament. You don't necessarily need to be a student enrolled. Do you want to play? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I was so burnt out at that point that I was like, part of me was so happy that I had aged out, because that meant that there was no pressure for me to play anymore. And then that invitation, I was like, oh, like in the back of my head, I was like, hell no, I don't want to play. And then the other part of me felt so guilty that was my thought. And so I was like, could I play? And then I think my grief, I'm kind of like protecting. It was like a protective factor that I was like, no, I'm not going to play, because it almost like as in like I'm leaving on my terms. And I don't have regrets of not playing that tournament. I think like for me, it was the right time to just step away from sports. And I really enjoyed what I was doing professionally. So yeah, just taking that step back was kind of the right timing. But yeah, it's like a sad process, because it's just like that grief is just so big, right? And it can kind of like, and the burnout too. So yeah, lots of layers to it.
And as you're working through that process for yourself, what suggestions would you have for, those people that are, experiencing that now, because there is such an uncertainty around sport and what provincial health is going to allow? What kind of suggestions would you have for those athletes that, I guess would feel a little bit lost at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like number one is just validation, right? It's like, it is crappy feelings, and it's not fun, and it's like the unpredictability is rough. I talk about puzzle pieces sometimes. So when I was playing, my athlete puzzle piece was huge. And then I had other little puzzle pieces, like I love crafting, and I love hiking, and I love the outdoors. But when I was playing, those little puzzle pieces that made up who I am were so small in comparison to my athlete puzzle piece. So I guess my advice would just be to, how do we kind of find balance and shrinking that puzzle piece so that it's still important, it's still part of who you are, but how do we make it so that it's more balanced with the other puzzle pieces that make up who you are as an individual? And I've had a couple conversations with one teammate who just graduated, and then one girl who's a senior who's about to graduate. And COVID's gifted us time, and time allows us to kind of reflect on those other puzzle pieces, which is really nice. I would say reach out to alumni, reach out. And I know the rugby program is really cool, because Tiffany Dutremont had started a mentorship program to kind of help those seniors navigate that transition into the professional career. So utilizing that, and I encourage other teams to maybe start that as well. There's been some research in some programs in the States that kind of mentorship program and transition program out of sports is really helpful. But I would just say, like, honor kind of your feelings and sit with them, and it's okay to be sad and to grieve, and reach out to alumni, reach out to your family and friends, reach out to professional help if that's something that feels right for you. So that's what I would kind of say to those athletes who are having a tough time with that COVID.
Great. Just kind of one final question for you today is, when you look back and reflect on your time at the University of Lethbridge, how has that helped to prepare you for, what you're doing now?
Oh man, well, I guess like for sure I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the Pronghorns and my experience as a varsity athlete, like professionally and personally, right? So like that, the whole counseling piece, I'm really passionate about working with athletes. Um, and again, like that's the personal tie and the professional tie. I love counseling and talking to athletes and not athletes and parents and coaches. So I just love hearing people's stories, and I feel like I can resonate to people's experiences as well. Um, yeah.
That's great. Thank you for joining us today. It was great catching up with you, and we look forward to watching you progress through your career. And if you're looking for information on the stuff that Freddie's doing, her Instagram account that she's just launched is Athletes Afterthought. And stay tuned for the next Heart of a Pronghorn coming soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ian.